I'm delighted to welcome our speakers to join us today. To my right, we have Mr. Yukiyatsu Akizawa, Chairman and Chief Executive Officer of Heroes Edutainment and founder of the AM/PM convenience store here in Japan. In the center, we have Kojiro Shiraishi, with, I think, probably the best title of our speakers today, which is Ocean Racer. And on Mr. Shiraishi's right, we have Rod Lappin, Vice President of the Lenovo Group and President of Lenovo NEC Holdings here in Japan. Let me start by shaping some of our discussions and setting the scene for what we're going to discuss this afternoon. We've been hearing a little bit about reviving corporate spirits in Japan. Earlier on today, over lunch, we were discussing issues around talent development of global talent here in Japan, and some of the challenges that Japanese corporations have faced, and also foreign corporations operating here in Japan, and then more broadly thinking about moving overseas. We've seen record outbound M&A by Japanese firms in recent years, capitalizing, first of all, on the strength of the yen, and also in response to declining opportunities, perhaps, here domestically. All of this leads to huge demands on organizations and on people in terms of managing diversity. So these are some of the things that we'd like to look at, but with a much more sort of domestic focus here, I think. To get us moving, I'd like to pose one or two questions, actually, to everybody in turn, which, let me just start with this. Akizawa-san, if I could turn to you, how would you define this idea of global talent? And secondly, is Japan making the most of its human capital in this age of globalization?
When we talk about the word global, that was your question. As things change so rapidly in society now, the question arises whether people can fulfill their different roles. Can they fulfill their functions? Can they become people that are truly needed and desired by corporations, organizations, other staff persons? And are, first of all, Japanese staff being well used or by the global community? I think it's something that absolutely needs to be done, at least in the future. If I think back to what Mr. Abe said this morning, as globalization proceeds in the world, as the world becomes more international, as the world changes at tremendous speeds, the sense of crisis that we all must have, we must be able to be sensitive to these tremendous changes. I think everybody feels these things in principle. We understand that something must be done. But frankly, I don't think that Japan has been able to really respond to these needs as much as it should. I think everyone here basically feels the same needs in Japanese society, and I think you're all at the forefront of efforts to try to deal with the changing situation. So as long as there are conferences like this, or as long as there are meeting places like this where people think about these issues, I think the possibilities for Japan are positive.
How is it that you define global talent? And I know that you have Asia-Pacific responsibilities as well, and I just wonder how different things are outside of Japan, within Lenovo, and domestically as well.
Sure. Thanks, Andy. So I'm like Shiraishi-san, I only flew back yesterday, but he was in the Aegean Sea. I was in Sri Lanka, so it feels a bit different to me, actually. I'd much would have preferred to be in the Aegean Sea. Yeah, okay, so for those of you who don't know, I'm actually responsible for a joint venture here in Japan, which is basically 51% owned by Lenovo, which we absolutely classify as a global organization through both acquisition as well as organic growth, and NEC, which is probably one of the most Japanese companies you could possibly have. And we are the #1 PC company in Japan here. We're sort of #3 in tablets. And we're sort of a great technology, and some of you hopefully have enjoyed some of the tablet technology we put on the tables today with our partner Citrix. From my perspective, I think some of the challenges we've had here versus overseas, I think, as we had a little session at lunchtime, Andy, I think talent here in Japan has generally, and a little bit like Akizawa-san mentioned, been very Japan domestic looking. And from our perspective, it's very, very hard to find that creativity, the flexibility in the workforce that you tend to get when you get overseas. And I think it stems largely from the education structure all the way through then traditional Japanese companies, system, and how it actually sort of draws you into compliance with a specific system. And for us locally, hiring really great talent in Japan tends to be quite challenging for that reason.
Thinking about higher education, and it certainly seems to be the case that the number of undergraduates going overseas has been declining, just at the time when the number of Japanese companies going overseas through acquisitions or seeking new growth overseas have a real demand for these type of... How do we deal with this mismatch? And I wonder, Akizawa-san, what would your advice be to university principals about the nature of the education, and particularly that overseas engagement that young people seem to need today?
Well, it so happens that together with Heroes Edutainment, we are conducting different activities as well. That is, for the children who have experienced the earthquake in Tohoku, we have the homestay program overseas for the junior high and the senior high school students in 6 countries of the world. We are sending these kids to 6 countries of the world. Those people who are damaged by the earthquake are hungry for warmth. So when they feel the warmth of people, they feel grateful, and they would like to absorb the culture of the country that they go to. In order to do that, they have to know more about Japan. In other words, rather than study for the sake of study, for living. And also, as I mentioned at the outset, what for? What a person is going to live for, role that a person has. Children will come to realize that. The children leave their parents' place and live in a different culture. That will be very effective indeed.
The panel's thinking about sort of structural reform, and I think Jesper Cole talking particularly about immigration and how it is possible to hire foreigners. I think the example was Lawson. But that in many cases, the corporate world holds itself back, particularly established big business, maybe Keidan then members and so on. But I'm also thinking it's the educational establishment, it's parents as well. What can Japan be doing to get itself into a position where it's actually utilizing its human capital to the best potential? It seems that there are people in jobs who are not being utilized to their best potential. How can particularly thinking about companies, what can they be doing to encourage a different type of attitude towards work and engagement with the global economy? Shiraishi-san, maybe if I could ask you that question, particularly as you draw on your experiences of being overseas and traveling around, what type of message do you bring back from those travels?
Well, in my case, by yacht races, of course, that's an international yacht race that I'm always, we have Japanese, British people, French people, Americans, Irish people. In fact, my team was composed of this international group. They come from different nations, different religions, different cultures, different educational systems. However, one clear thing was that we put up a flag, and everybody came together under this flag. Having said that, all of their ways of thinking, the way of doing things are completely different. The direction in which they are facing are all the same, but everything else is similar. If you're going to have an international team, this is the reality. If we're talking more in broad terms about Japan, you want to have people who want to become more challenging, who want to take on different challenges, who want to bring in lots and lots of diversity. Does everybody in Japan really think that's a good thing? You know, I wonder, so people talk about internationalization in Japan all the time, but I wonder how serious people are about that. But I do feel, as I travel through other countries of the world, that Japan is unique and unusual in that sense. So on the one hand, I go abroad, and many Japanese people go abroad and take in things from abroad. But on the other hand, you have these other companies that just have focused on one task or one specialty for hundreds of years. What is important is that Japan can perhaps be a unique country in that it can maintain its traditions and still bring in things from abroad.
I mean, we've heard a lot about diversity in Japan being, Jeff referencing, let's get more women into the workforce and let's get more women into senior positions. That's an aspect of diversity. But I think what Shiraishi-san, Akizawa-san were talking about was, you know, knowing who you are culturally and socially, but also then fostering this great interest in the outside world. How can you blend those two things together?
Yeah, it's a challenge, certainly the way that Shiraishi-san's put it. I think this is the this is Japan's strength and weakness. Fundamentally, beautifully strong culture, really strong, and we all know that. Everyone in this room knows that. And it's I think whether it's a bit of the Buddhism in the background in society, but I find that Japan is incredibly respectful of other cultures and ways of doing business. And I think that's one of the strengths, actually. It's more just about getting the individuals passionate about the outside world. I think that's fundamentally what we're talking about. When we took on the NEC PC business here in Japan 3 years ago, every single one of the NEC PC leadership guys had graduated from Tokyo University. They went from day one out of graduation from Tokyo University into the NEC Corporation. They knew nothing but the NEC Corporation. Even when they went overseas with the NEC Corporation, they were still within the NEC Corporation. Now, when you have a look at the Lenovo team, when we actually started going through our integration strategy, I had 12 people from NEC that were 100% NEC guys, had never worked anywhere else except NEC, straight from university. I had the Lenovo team here in Japan, and my CFO had worked at McDonald's, P&G, and Motorola. My HR person had actually worked at Motorola and Avaya. And my head of sales had worked at Hitachi, he's in the room at the moment, in Hitachi and Isilon. And so we had all these diverse sort of company experiences, and many of them had lived overseas. A couple of the NEC guys had also been based overseas, but they only knew one way, because NEC was a very fundamental Japanese company. What we found when we actually started getting the team together is the Japanese leadership team knew Japan to perfection. I have no doubt nobody in Japan understands the consumer market in Japan better than my NEC leadership team. There is no doubt in my mind. But outside of that, they've got a real broad skills gap. They don't understand how the United States works, or how China works, or how Western Europe works, or how any other country really works, or other companies really work. They haven't got that experience out there. So I think really at a young age right now, we've got to if we're going to go and build more SoftBanks and more Rakutens and more DNAs, etc., I think to Akizawa-san's point, we've got to get the young people in Japan a lot more exposed to overseas. We have to.
I think some very nice inspirational words to finish on. It certainly seems that Japan is in a position now where it is resetting and looking forward to the future. So it just remains for me to thank all of you for your participation in this panel, and if I could invite the audience to show their appreciation. Thank you.